The first thing I remember is the noise. Metal screaming against metal. Hammers cracking. Machines pounding like artillery. It was 1943, and I had just walked into the weapons factory that was supposed to save my life. My name is Marcos. Back then, I wasn't thinking about ethics, or history, or even the war. I was thinking about money. Or rather, the lack of it. My wife was pregnant with our first child. Our landlord had already, politely, warned us twice. Debt collectors were circling. Every coin that passed through my hands felt slippery, like it was trying to escape. When that inspector job opened up at the factory, it wasn't an opportunity. It was oxygen. On my first day, the supervisor clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder and shouted over the noise. "Here, Marcos, there's only one word that matters. Produce." Got it. I nodded. Of course I got it. Production meant weapons. Weapons meant contracts. Contracts meant the factory kept paying me. And I needed that salary more than I needed sleep. At least, that's what I believed. Weeks passed. I learned the routine. Check the parts. Stamp the approval. Move on. Faster. Always faster. But then I started noticing something that didn't match the manuals. Armor plates a little thinner than specified. Bolts that felt lighter in my hand. Components that looked cheaper. 1 millimeter less doesn't change anything. A colleague whispered once, sliding a stack of unchecked reports toward me. The front line won't notice. But the factory saves enough to keep everyone happy. Everyone. Who was everyone? When I hesitated, when I asked a few too many questions, the smiles disappeared. My supervisor leaned in, voice low, words sharp. "Marcos, do you want to lose your salary?" That sentence hit harder than any explosion. Lose my salary? With a child on the way? With debts waiting like wolves at my door? In that moment, I understood something terrifying. My fear wasn't about bombs or bullets. It was about my bank account. My empty bank account. Tell me, have you ever stayed silent at work? Or swallowed your opinion? Just because you were afraid of losing your income? If this story is already making you think, hit the like button so this reaches more people who need to hear it. And if you've ever felt financially trapped, keep watching. By the end of this video, I'll show you how I turned that fear into a plan and how you can start doing the same. If you want to follow this whole journey, consider subscribing. This isn't just a war story. It's about your money, your choices, and how to stop living at the mercy of a single yes. The first day I walked into that factory, the smell hit me before the noise did. Burnt metal, oil, sweat. And under all of that, something I couldn't name yet, but I felt it, like a tension in the air. I was the new inspector. Marcos. Jacket still too clean, shoes not yet stained with grease. My supervisor, a man with hollow eyes and a forced smile, walked me down the noisy line. "Your job is simple," he shouted over the machines. "Check. Stamp. Approve. We need volume. The army's waiting." That word, volume, echoed in my head. Not safety. Not quality. Volume. He handed me a clipboard and a small metal stamp with my initials. "Every part that passes gets your mark. If it fails, send it back." But he paused there, and his voice lowered. "Be reasonable. We're all under pressure." Reasonable. I knew what that meant, even if I pretended I didn't. My pockets were empty, my wife was pregnant, my rent was late. I had borrowed money from my brother-in-law just to make it to the end of the previous month. So when he said be reasonable, what I actually heard was, "Don't be a problem, Marcos. You can't afford it." The first pieces on my line were solid. Heavy, well-machined. I inspected them, checked the measurements, gave my stamp. But by the second week, I started noticing something odd. The same part number, the same blueprint, but the weight? Lighter. The walls of the piece? Thinner. I held an older part in one hand, the new version in the other. One felt like it belonged in a war machine. The other felt like it belonged in a toy. I asked a worker next to me, "Did they change the design?" He looked around before answering. "Not on paper." "Then why?" He cut me off with a quick shake of his head. "Don't ask too much. Just do your job. You got a baby coming, right?" That stopped me cold. He shouldn't have known that. But apparently, everyone did. My need wasn't private. It was part of the system. Tell me, have you ever felt that? That people don't just know your weaknesses, they're counting on them? If this story is resonating with you so far, stick with me. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing, because what I discovered next in that factory didn't just change my job. It changed the way I think about money, power, and the price we pay for silence. The first week, I tried to ignore it. I told myself, "Marcos, you're new. You don't understand how this place works yet. Besides, the numbers on my paycheck were finally big enough to quiet my panic for a while. But then came the night shift. I was standing on the inspection line, the air thick with oil and metal dust, when a batch of suspension brackets came through. These parts weren't for toys. They were for trucks going straight to the front. I picked one up, felt the weight in my hands, and my stomach tightened. Too light. I grabbed the technical sheet hanging on the clipboard, ran my thumb across the specs, and looked again at the part in my hand. The steel grade was wrong. The thickness was off. It would probably hold, until it didn't. I called the machine operator over. "Hey, Joao, did you change the material on this run?" He glanced around first, then leaned in. "Marcos, don't start. That's what they sent from the warehouse." "But the specs." He cut me off with a look that said more than his words. "You have a kid on the way, right?" I felt my jaw clench. "What does that have to do with?" "With everything," he said. "Stamp it. Approve. Go home. Sleep." I didn't sleep. The next day, I went to my supervisor. I kept my tone respectful, my words precise, almost rehearsed. "There's a discrepancy between the material used and the official specs. If these trucks go to the front like this..." He didn't even let me finish. He closed the office door gently, sat down, and folded his hands. "Marcos, you're a smart man," he said. "So I'll assume you understand the situation. I understand enough to know soldiers could die because..." He raised a finger. "Because you want to be a hero? Listen carefully. We have quotas. We have deadlines. And you," he tapped the desk, "have debts. A pregnant wife. No savings." My throat went dry. He had my file open on the desk. My salary. My advance. Even the loan I'd taken to pay the doctor. "If you start blocking batches," he continued, "production slows. If production slows, someone has to answer for it. And if someone has to answer..." He let the sentence hang. "Do you want to lose your salary, Marcos?" That sentence hit harder than any explosion at the front. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. It wasn't just steel that was being tested here. It was my integrity, and it was hanging by the same thin thread as our bank account. Tell me something. Have you ever stayed quiet at work, accepted something that felt wrong, just because you couldn't risk losing your paycheck? If this is hitting a nerve, stick with me. In the next part, I'll show you exactly how that fear kept me trapped and what finally broke it. And if you want to follow the whole story and the financial plan that came out of it, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next chapters. They called it an adjustment. Just a small change to the specs on a batch of armored vehicle parts. Less metal, thinner walls, same outside appearance. On paper, it looked efficient. In my hands, it felt like betrayal. I was at my station, caliper in hand, checking the new pieces. Lighter. Too light. If shrapnel hit this, it wouldn't hold. Not the way it needed to. I walked to my supervisor's office, that cramped little room with yellowed papers pinned to the wall and a permanent cloud of cigarette smoke. "Something's wrong with these parts," I said, placing one on his desk. "They're not up to the original spec. If this goes to the front line..." He didn't even look up at first, just kept scribbling on a form. "We've updated the design," he cut in. "Engineering signed off. Production signed off. Your job is to inspect according to the current spec." "But the current spec is weaker," I insisted. "You know that. Anyone who touches this knows that." This time he did look up. His eyes didn't show anger, just fatigue. The kind of tired that has made too many compromises. "Marcos," he said quietly, "you have a baby on the way, don't you?" My stomach tightened. "Yes." He leaned back, folding his hands over his chest. "Do you want to keep your salary?" The room went silent. The sound of the machines in the factory suddenly felt louder, like they were grinding against my spine. In that moment, every part of my life stood in that office with me. My wife resting on a thin mattress, the rent overdue, the empty pantry, the hospital bill we didn't know how we'd pay. I opened my mouth to argue. Nothing came out. I picked up the part, nodded mechanically, and walked back to my station. For the first time, I realized something brutal. It wasn't just the soldiers at the front risking their lives. It was us, too, selling tiny pieces of our conscience every time we said yes, because we couldn't afford to say no. If you've ever felt forced to accept something you knew was wrong, just to survive, stay with me. Have you ever stayed silent at work out of fear of losing your income? If this is resonating, tap like so this story reaches more people. And if you want to see where this path led, and how I finally broke that financial chokehold, Hit subscribe and come with me to the next part. They escorted me out of the main hall and into a narrow corridor that smelled of oil and wet concrete. At the end of it, there was a small door, half hidden behind a stack of wooden crates. Behind that door, the real factory began. No windows, just a low ceiling, yellow light, and 3 men around a table with ledgers and metal samples. Not soldiers, not engineers, accountants. On the table, there were parts one recognized: bolts, brackets, armor plates. Next to each one, a cost column, a weight column, and a neat little number circled in red, saving. One of them looked up at me and smiled like a patient teacher. "Marcos," he said, "you're an intelligent man. Tell me, what's more important in war, perfection or production?" I hesitated. "If the part fails on the front." He raised a hand. "That's a problem for the front," he said calmly. "Our problem is here. If the numbers fail here, the factory closes. And then your problem is at home." He tapped the ledger with 2 fingers. "Look, this line is your salary. This line is your wife's food. This line is your baby's crib. All of this," he pointed to the metal on the table, "is just detail." I remember staring at my own signature on an inspection form lying there. Next to it, a small handwritten note. "Approved with reservation." My attempt at honesty. He circled it with a pencil. "This, my friend, is dangerous. Not for us. For you. A man without savings cannot afford reservations. He can only afford yes." He leaned in so close I could smell the tobacco on his breath. "You think we don't know your debts? You think we don't know you asked for an advance on your first paycheck? You depend on this place. That means you depend on us. And men who depend obey." I walked out of that room with a clear order. Sign, don't question. Produce, don't think. Tell me, have you ever stayed quiet at work? Not because you agreed, but because you needed the paycheck? If this story is hitting close to home, keep watching. In the next part, I'll show you exactly how I began to escape that trap. And if you don't want to miss it, you can subscribe now and come with me to the next chapter. The next morning, I walked into the factory already knowing what I was going to do, and terrified of it. I headed straight to the production line. The noise was the same, the smell of oil and metal the same. But once you see something, you can't unsee it. Every time a crate of those lighter gears rolled by, all I could picture were soldiers in the mud, praying the engine wouldn't fail. At my station, I pretended to work as usual, clipboard in hand, numbers in columns. But my real inspection was different now. I started noting the irregularities in my own code. Extra marks, small signals only I would understand. If someone read it quickly, it was just routine paperwork. If someone really looked, they'd see the pattern. During lunch, I sat alone at the edge of the yard, chewing on bread that tasted like sawdust. I took out a small notebook, my wife's notebook, actually. She used it to track our debts. I turned to the last page and began a list. Not of money, but of names. Supervisors, foremen, inspectors who had adjusted reports. The ones who took envelopes. The ones who looked away. My hands were shaking. Each name I wrote felt like loading a bullet with my own fingerprint on it. Marcos. I looked up. It was one of the older inspectors, a quiet man with tired eyes. He sat beside me without asking. "You're making too many notes," he said softly. "That's dangerous." "You see it too," I said. He stared ahead, watching the smoke rise from the chimneys. "Of course I see it. We all do." He paused. "They don't need us to agree. They just need us to stay quiet." "Why do you stay?" I asked. He swallowed. 2 daughters. One's sick. Medicine isn't free. Then he looked at my notebook. "And you?" "My wife's pregnant. We're in debt." He nodded. "So you understand." I did. "Too well. Let me ask you something. Has money ever silenced you? Made you accept something at work you knew was wrong, just because you needed that paycheck? If this is hitting a nerve, stay with me. And if this story is making sense so far, you know what to do. Hit like so this reaches more people caught in the same trap. In the next part, I'll show you how this story pushed me to build the first real financial plan of my life, and how you can start yours, step by step. I kept working at the factory, but after that night with the truck, nothing looked the same. Once you see the crack in the wall, you can't unsee it. I'd pick up a part and hear 2 voices in my head. One said, "It passed the test. Stamp it. Move on." The other whispered, "Would you put this in the truck carrying your own brother?" That question started haunting me. On the outside, everything kept its rhythm. Machines roaring, foremen shouting, papers piling up. Inside me, Another war was starting. And it wasn't about steel or oil. It was a war between fear and responsibility. I realized something terrifying. The most powerful weapon in that factory wasn't the machinery. It was our paychecks. Because when you're living from paycheck to paycheck, they don't need chains or guards. All they need to say is, "Do you want to lose your salary?" And almost everyone goes silent. I started noticing how fear controlled the whole place. The older worker who saw cracks in the casings but quietly marked them as okay. The young guy who knew the measurements were off but shrugged and said, "Man, I've got 3 kids." The supervisor who pretended not to see anything because the production bonus was too good. None of these people were evil. They were scared. And fear loves debt. Fear loves an empty fridge. Fear loves a baby on the way and no savings in the bank. That's when it hit me. If you have no financial cushion, your no disappears. You say yes to whatever keeps the money dripping in, no matter the cost. Maybe you've never worked in a wartime factory, but maybe you've stayed quiet with a toxic boss, accepted an abusive client, or kept a job that's killing you, just because of that same fear. Have you ever said yes when everything in you wanted to say no, just because of money? If this is resonating with your story, stay with me. In the next part, I'll show you the simple plan I used to start breaking that trap. And if you want more stories like this one, consider subscribing and sticking around. When I think back to that factory, to those nights walking home with metal dust still on my skin, there's one feeling that stands out more than the noise, more than the fear: helplessness. Not because the situation was impossible, but because, at that time, I was. I was a man with 0 savings, a pregnant wife, debt pressing on my chest like a boot. And that's what made the factory so powerful. Not the machines, not the bosses, but the fact that they knew men like me couldn't afford to say no. And that's the part that matters for you. Here, today. Because the war changed, the uniforms changed, the buildings changed, but the mechanism is the same. Whenever you're living paycheck to paycheck, whenever your debt is so tight that you can't sleep, whenever you have no emergency savings, you become easy to control. You stay in jobs you hate. You accept conditions you know are wrong. You keep quiet when everything inside you is screaming. Not because you're weak, but because you're cornered. That's why this story is not just about corruption in a factory. It's about your power, your ability to say no, your ability to walk away, your ability to look at an unfair situation and not be forced to swallow it. And that starts with something very simple, almost boring: getting out of the most expensive debts, step by step, building that first small safety buffer, creating a basic plan so that every month, even a little, you're buying back a piece of your freedom. If this story opened your eyes in any way, tap the like button, so this kind of message reaches more people who feel trapped like I once did. Now I want to ask you, where, in your life today, do you feel you're saying yes only because you can't afford to say no? Tell me in the comments. Be honest. You might discover you're not as alone as you think. And if you want help building that financial shield, step by step, without magic, without miracles, subscribe to the channel. This story ends here, but your plan starts in the next video.